Ready to rock.
Thank you, George and Adrian. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're having a great day so far. And Clum and I are honored to be sharing this morning. And our topic is Leaders Are Readers. Thank you, George and Adrian. Good morning, everyone. Hope you're having a great day so far. So today our topic is Leaders Are Readers. And I'm going to share my husband with you. And he's going to start it off. So good to see you all. Here's Colombo.
Good morning, everyone. I'm just going to take a minute and open this up and then turn it back over to Karen. Uh, Probably the most important thing that I've done in my life to have any kind of success was to become an avid reader. And if you have read the Robert Kiyosaki's cash flow quadrant, you realize that 95% of the people fall in the left side of the cash flow quadrant. They're either employees or self-employed, and they only control 5% of the wealth. But 95% of the people are business owners or investors, and they live on the right side of the cash flow quadrant. And that's only 5% of the population, but they control 95% of the wealth. So when I saw that, my attitude was, what do I have to do to get from the left side of the quadrant to the right side of the quadrant? And the most important thing that I did was I had a great mentor initially, and he told me that reading was the most important thing that I can do. Because the difference between the left side of the quadrant and the right side of the quadrant is those people in the 5%, they think different, they act different, and they talk different than the rest of the world, and that's why they make different. So my story is I met my original mentor in college because I was going to college. I was a six-year freshman. I wasn't going to college to get an education. I was going to college because my dad was a disabled vet and they paid me to go to college. So after 6 years I was still a freshman. The only thing I got out of it was I met the guy that opened the door of opportunity to us. Once we got started, he asked me, Colombo, do you like to read? And I was very proud of the fact that I did not read. I said, no, I've never read a book in my life. Now, at the time, I was like 25 years old. And that was a badge of courage to me. No, I never read a book in my life. And he said, well, that's too bad. I said, why? He said, because if you're going to succeed in life, the most important thing you can do is read. And I said, okay, well, give me a book. So I said I didn't read. I didn't say I couldn't read. And that's when my life began as a reader and a whole new world opened up to me. The first book he gave me was The Magic of Thinking Big, and that changed my world. And I became an avid reader. We've been involved, as many of you know, in the industry now for 48 years. And for the first 20 years, I read a book a month. And that changed our lives. We became diamond in our initial format and have built this big, beautiful home, had a great lifestyle. But about 25 or so years ago, I said, gee, we've done so well reading a book a month. Imagine if I started reading a book a week. So for the last 25 years plus, I've gone segued to reading a book a week. And probably the thing that's influenced that the most is Audible, because now you can be doing anything. I see Greg in his car. He can be in his car listening to a book. You can be at the gym. You can be at work, depending on what your work is, and listening to a book. So I've been knocking down about a book a week now for, well, going on 30 years. Just to give you a comparison, if you got your not PhD, your first 4-year degree. What do they call that? Degree. It's just your degree in college. You've probably read about 50 books. All right. If you take one book per course. If you go on to get your master's, which takes only a couple of years,
For a
usually,
heck of it, so
you
you know,
probably
my
read about
pension check
25 more
probably
books.
one
And
thousand
then,
sixteen dollars and 24 cents. That's what
sorry,
50
somebody, I
bucks
think
is.
it's Tracy. You need to mute yourself, hon. Okay. So if you go on and get your PhD, like our middle son went and got his PhD, and he was doing it as well as teaching, and that took him about 5 or 6 years, but you're going to probably read another 50 books. So to go from high school graduate to a PhD, you're probably going to read approximately 150 books. And just to give you a comparison, reading a book a month for 20 years and then a book a week for the last 28 years, I've read about 1,600 books. Now, I don't know how many degrees that gives me. I don't have it a piece of paper on the wall, but it certainly has affected and changed our lives. So here's the probably the smartest thing I ever did, and I'll just kind of wrap this up and then turn it over to Karen, is we never paid our boys any kind of an allowance. But what we did do is we paid them to read. From the time that they learned to read, I started motivating them to read. I said, look, you clean your room or shut the door. I don't care. That's part of you living here. You eat because you live in this house. You know, you have a roof over your head, and I'm not going to pay you just to live here. All right. But if you read books, I will pay you. All three of our boys, I started paying about $5 a book when they were, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old. By the time they got to high school, I was paying them $50 a book. And even some of the neighborhood kids, hey, Mr. D, that's what I was known as, Mr. D. Mr. D, I'll read a book if you give me $50. I said, sure, you read the book and prove to me you read it, and I'll pay you $50. That was the most important thing that I did in my life, was get our three boys addicted to reading. Now, here's a point I want to make, and then I'll turn it back over to Karen. Our three boys read the same books. They read books on how to set goals, how to be positive, how to speak, how to have relationships, all those things. They read the same books, but they went in three totally different directions in their lives. Our oldest son always wanted to be in business for himself. By the time he was 21, I think he started his first business. He's run his own business now for well over 20 years. Very, very successful, has a huge business. And his direction from what he learned from reading books was to go into business. Our middle son went to academia, all right? And he became a college professor. He went on to get his master's and eventually his PhD. But his direction of success to go all the way to getting a PhD was a totally different direction from business. And our third son became a professional athlete. He was a professional hockey player for about 14 years, and just goes to show that the information is pure, the information is good, the information works no matter what direction you go. It's what you put in, how you think. And it's just, we're so excited about reading, and it's affected our lives so dramatically. Karen's going to be talking about one book in particular that was one of the first books I read that got me addicted to reading. If you're not an avid reader, you need to read this book, Think and Grow Rich by Burke Hedges. But some of the books, I got a bunch of them here, some of the best books. Here's How to Win Friends and Influence, Magic of Thinking Big, Go Pro by Eric Worre, You Inc. The Consistency Chain by a good friend of ours, Jim Packard, and he's actually also involved in the business. So reading every day can change your life in a positive way, because it's not how many people you bring into your business, it's how great of a leader you become. And most of us don't come in with those leadership skills. Most of us come in with an education or training to make us employees and trade dollars for hours. If you want to be different than that, you have to think different than that. And how you think is going to be determined by what you read. So thanks for just the cute few minutes. I'm going to turn this over to Karen, and she's going to take it on home. So thank you.
Thank you, honey. Well, welcome. And I am actually going to do almost like a book report. This book was Read and Grow Rich, but Napoleon Hill's company decided, instead of Think and Grow Rich, that Burke Hedges had to change it to Read and Get Rich. And he said, that's fine. We can grow or we can get, but as long as we read, we'll become rich. So anyway, his name is Burke Hedges, and this is Read and Get Rich today. So I wanted to just go through a couple of the things that really struck me. Well, the first page of this book says, the more you read, the more things you will know. The more that you learn, the more places you go. That was by a famous author, Dr. Seuss. Okay, so then there are a lot of famous people that contributed to this book. And I wanted to just share a couple of them in the books that changed their life. For instance, Lou Holtz. A lot of you here would know Lou Holtz, fabulous all-time winning coach, coached Notre Dame. He's a beautiful motivational speaker as well. And he credits the book, The Magic of Thinking Big, as Colombo. That was his first book by David Schwartz. it was a turning point in his profession. To this day, he still is oozing positive can-do attitudes, and we love Lou Holtz. Then there's W. Clement Stone. He was a multimillionaire
It's
businessman,
although it's
had a big
training, but
insurance
it's
company.
also
And can everybody mute, please?
it's
Thank you.
learning. And I'll be honest, I was
Olga?
one of those
I'm sorry, I can't get to the mute. Thank
that
you.
did not think, you
So, thank you. So W. Clement Stone's had a
but the
huge
more and
business,
more I'm
and
on, the more and more,
Olga
yeah,
Smith, could you mute,
you
please?
know, and for
Thank
me,
you.
not being individual,
I'm sorry, I can't get to it. W. Clement Stone's a multimillionaire, and he attributes the book that he read that changed his life was Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. And it changed the course of his life, he said. And that book inspired W. Clement Stone to live a lifelong habit of helping others by giving them personal growth books. Donna Reed, now many of you are too young to remember Donna Reed, but she was an Academy Award winner and an early TV star, and she was shy and insecure. And as a high school freshman, she read How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. And upon completing that book, she got enough courage to land a part in the school play, and that set up her for a 40-year career in movies and TVs, and she was very popular. How about J.W. Marriott, president of Marriott Hotels? He was so moved by the message of the greatest salesman in the world by Og Mandino. Upon completing the book, he gave a copy of this to all of his marketing executives. Then there's Dave Thomas, right? He is the founder of Wendy's, and he was a high school dropout, poor self-image and he was over 50, I think, by the time he started Wendy's. He happened to read The Power of Positive Thinking, and that was by Norman Vincent Peale. And that gave him the courage and the attitude of really going big. And he has built an empire of thousands and thousands of restaurants all over the world. Phyllis Diller. In our day and age, she was one of the famous comedians, and she was hilarious. But she was a frustrated, insecure housewife. But she read The Magic of Believing, and that's by Claude Bristol. And that gave her confidence to try her hand at show business, and she went on to become one of the best-known comics in the world. I got to try to sneak in a quick story. We were invited to a Washington charity dinner, and so we were in the audience, and one of the entertainers was Phyllis Diller, but she was in the round, which means she would face one way and she would see part of the audience, then she'd turn around, face the other way. And that's difficult. Colombo and I have actually spoken in the round, and it's difficult. But anyway, so what she did was she looked at the audience and she said to the audience, because she was always so funny, she said, "Please excuse my front." And then she turned around and she said to the audience and to the audience in the back, "Please excuse my back." So she was just one of those memorable comedians, and it started with a book. Then there's Archie Moore. He was a former light heavyweight boxing champion who knocked out a record of 148 opponents in 228 bouts. He wasn't much of a reader until he was cast as one of the characters, the slave Jim, in the movie version of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn. Moore read the book to prepare himself for that role. And then he said, quote, "Now that I've found books, I'm really living." So many people have great stories. So Burke Hedges wrote this because he believed reading was leveling the field. And so he said, you see, reading is like no other, it's a single activity. We are in control. We choose to read or not, he said. But no other single activity levels the playing field, so to speak. This is the great equalizer. Reading transforms us from who we are right now to who we can become in the future. And when we're transformed even slightly, we're richer than the day before. So, there's a right time and a right book, and it can change your life. And he tells a little bit of his story here. He was, at this time, he was earning, it was like 35 years ago, he was earning $5.50 an hour. He was sharing a tiny one-bedroom apartment with his pregnant wife and his 1-year-old. You know, it was tight in there. And he was feeling sorry for himself and probably complaining and this and that. And he says, finally, this guy, one of my friends, gave me this book, and it was called The Greatest Salesman in the World by Og Mandino. And it certainly was a turning point in his life. He talked about also later he read Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich, and he thought, wow, that was a lot on the political side, on the business side, because you know Napoleon Hill was commissioned to write this book, and he spent over 20 years compiling information and knowledge to put into his book Think and Grow Rich. He learned from the greatest industrialists and businessmen of his time, Andrew Carnegie, John D. Rockefeller, Henry Ford. And it was very much oriented to monetary. And what Burke Hedges wanted to do is he wanted to say, not only are these books that we read, the books that we read, not only are they going to help us in our business financial, but they're going to help us in all areas. And that was his wish, that it would help us in all areas of our life, whether it be in love, with happiness, health. We know health is so important, in fulfillment, doing something we want, making a difference like we are in this business today, in knowledge, in our faith walk. In other words, rich in all phases of our life. You know, this was the one sentence that came out of this book when I first read it many years ago, and it struck me as being so profound. This was before a lot of the audible books and things like that. But he said, I've thought a lot about the impact The Greatest Salesman in the World and other great books have had on my life, trying to figure out how black letters printed on a white page, a piece of paper, had the power to change the direction of my life. And I'm thinking, wow, think about that. When we would be reading, there's the black letters in the white pages, and they just come alive. And I thought, oh my goodness, it just was so profound to me. And he came across another article by a Pulitzer Prize winner. He was a historian named Daniel Boorstin. And he summed up the value of reading in this one simple yet profound sentence, quote, by reading, we discover our world, our history, and ourselves. So, you know, there are other aspects that happen. He said, you know, reading will change us in worlds in ways we don't even know. We can't even comprehend it. But scientists and doctors have found reading even changes the shape of our brains. So we are transformed by the written word. And when you have all heard this too, in the midst of our career of trying to be successful in this and that, he said, well, the timing is very important. So when the student is ready, the teacher appears, right? And so for him, the teacher was Og Mandino. And when he read that book, the Greatest Salesman in the World, and I don't want to spoil it if you haven't, but it's a great book, a small book to read. It's a skinny book, and in his process, a lot of people say, well, this is a little book. I can easily read that. But as easy as you can read it, it's very easy for you to say, oh, I'll do it another day. Just let it sit there. It's just a little skinny book. But that little skinny book has the 10 scrolls in it. And it's the story about Hafid. And he was just a poor camel boy, and he became extremely successful. And he was a mentor to many, and he wrote this book is about him. It's a novel, but it's about him with these great treasures in it. And from the 10 scrolls, you'll understand. The power of books has the chance and the way to transform people's lives. I'm going to tell you a story here. This is a story about a woman named Sonia Carson. And she was in foster homes back and forth all the time. And she just had no upbringing to speak of that was anything solid or normal. And she rarely attended school. When she was 13, she got married to a man and had 2 children. By the time she was having her second children, that man left her. I don't know if they, I guess, divorced her, but he was already a married man. So she was taken in by a holster, I guess. Anyway, when she gave birth to her second child, her husband left her. And then she seemed doomed for life. But she had something in her that she said, okay, she was going to raise these 2 boys no matter how it happened. And when she had decided on that, she said, what I know I'm going to do is, boys, you are not going to be sitting in front of the TV. She limited them to the television, to watching 2 programs a week. And what she insisted that they do was to read, because they were in school, they learned to read. She did not really know how to read very well at all. She insisted that their boys would read books and read them out loud to her, and then give her the book report on what it meant. So I thought that was so wonderful. She also insisted that they read the Bible, the book of Proverbs. You know, the book of Proverbs gives us daily wisdom on how to perform in this world, right? The book of Psalms is more of our relationship with the Lord, but the book of Proverbs, she had them read it. So these boys read and read and read. And one time in their life, these boys were embarrassed with their mother because she couldn't talk very well, she couldn't read. And she said, well, teach me to read, help me to read. Don't criticize me, please help me. And they did help her. And she went on to get her GED, and she went on to chase her dream, which was to become an interior decorator. So anyway, by the time college came around, both of these boys had been avid readers. They did tremendous in school, and they both got scholarships. Curtis graduated from the University of Michigan, and Ben graduated from Yale. Well, let me tell you a little bit more about that. The boys went on to enjoy great professional careers. Curtis was an engineer. His wife is a physician. His brother, Dr. Benjamin Carson, was the director of pediatric neurosurgery. Some of you will remember the story. And in 1987, Dr. Benjamin Carson performed an amazing surgery to help conjoined twins be separated. He was only 35 years old, and that's what he did. He had educated to become a great, not just doctor, a neurosurgeon, and he performed that surgery and became famous. And he also has written a book. I think it's called Think Big. He also ran for president. And but he didn't become president, but he did become Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. I am sure their mother are so proud of her sons. But you see the slight edge there. The edge was reading, and they did it to her insistence, which was remarkable. So I want to read you a couple of statistics. Books are right in front of our faces. Do you know from the National Institute of Literacy, these are some statistics which are staggering. 75% of unemployed adults have reading and writing difficulties. 43% of adults with low literacy skills live in poverty. I just heard another statistic that 30% at any one time in America, 30% of people are living in poverty. That's 1 out of 3. That's an amazing stat. 22% of American adults read and write at the 5th grade level or below. And 70% of prisoners score in the 2 lowest literacy levels. And so many of us, we now know, well, we have the choice, right, to read. And there's another little bit that Burke Hendricks was saying. He says, I'm more concerned about the self-employed illiterates choosing not to read when we could choose to read, right? They're wasting their time on junk, magazines, gossip, weekly tabloids. As Mark Twain observed, quote, the person who can read but doesn't isn't any better off than the person who can't read. I think Mark Twain had that right. Here's one more quick story, and then I think I'm going to have to close. Here's another story about Abraham Lincoln. So Abraham Lincoln was born in a one-room cabin in rural Kentucky, and he really didn't learn how to read well in the very beginning. He had a hunger for it, but he did learn his alphabet. And by the age of 7, he was fascinated with books. Wherever he can get his hands on a book, he would read. He would also write the alphabet. He would take on a wooden plank, a branch, and he would burn the end of this, like wooden stick or a branch, and he would use that as his pencil, and he would write out the alphabet. And he became an avid reader. Wherever he could go and get a hold of books, he would read, and he would practice writing and knowing his spelling. So he sought and borrowed books, and he read the autobiography of Benjamin Franklin, the life of Washington. His mother died when he was 9 years old, and when his father remarried, he remarried a woman named Sarah Bush and Lincoln, and she brought a few pieces of furniture and 3 books. She brought these 3 books to her home now with Abe Lincoln's dad. She brought Webster's Speller. She brought The Adventures of Robinson Crusoe, and she brought in The Arabian Nights. And Abraham Lincoln devoured those books over and over and over again. And he became such a good a reader and a proficient speller. The neighbors in the neighborhood would hire Abraham Lincoln to write letters for them and short wills and things like that. Well, when he was 21 years old, he went out on his own and he went into New Salem, Illinois. And then over the next 7 years, he had a job that would allow him to read. He had extra spare time. I don't know exactly what that job was, maybe a postmaster. I don't know. So he read all about philosophy, science, religion, literature, law, and politics. Well, he actually gave himself a first grade type of college degree by reading. And at age 28, he had continued that course. He said he actually was certified to practice law in the state of Illinois, even though he only had 1 year of actual grade education. So he wasn't the brightest, he wasn't a genius, but he had a lot of common sense and he had that hunger for reading. And so he said he understood in his early life that reading was the best tool available for advancing his world. He transformed himself by advancing in the world he was a backwoodsman, but he transformed himself into one of the greatest men in history with the amazing power of reading. And of course, we know he was our 16th president. And Harry S. Truman was also one of those gentlemen that was an avid reader, and he became so enthralled with reading, he actually read the Encyclopedia Britannica. Now, I don't think my grandkids even know what an encyclopedia is today because they've got Google. But anyway, there were these big things called encyclopedias, and Harry S. Truman read that along with other things, the greatest, masterpieces and things like that. But he made a quote that you'll recognize because he was a great reader. Harry S. Truman said, "Not every reader is a leader, but every leader must be a reader." So I thought that was pretty powerful stuff. And Harvey Mackay had another quote, and we've said this before. He said, Harvey Mackay, by the way, wrote Swimming with the Sharks Without Getting Eaten. Harvey Mackay said, quote, "Our lives change in two ways, through the people we meet and the books we read." So if you don't get it yet, this is all about how important it is to read, how we have the privilege to read, and how a lot of people have that privilege and don't choose it for their lives. But it will change. It changed our lives. I'm sure it's changed everybody here because you're in the mastermind. I call this the mastermind. So we said, well, instead of finding reasons not to read, find the reasons or the excuses to read, right? Because instead of finding those excuses not to read, find the excuses to read. Why not tell yourself you deserve to be rich, right? This is read and get rich. And then Napoleon Hills was think and get rich. So when you're reading, you're thinking, don't you deserve to be rich? And tell yourself that 15 minutes a day is only 1% of your day. That 1% of time will give you the greatest return ever in your whole life, we believe. Tell yourself you're not going to use the slight edge of reading tell yourself you're going to use the slight edge of being a reader to get you ahead in life. Tell yourself to open one of those books you bought a while back, but you haven't started. And then tell yourself to read 15 minutes a day, just 15 minutes a day. It will become a habit. And then you'll probably be like my husband, Colombo. He's like a voracious reader. He loves to be always learning. So choose how to spend your time. And the sad thing is today, they did statistics and when they said how many times are people or how many hours do people spend on screens, whether it be computer or smartphones and everything, it's up to almost 7 hours a day. I don't even know how somebody could do that. 7 hours a day in front of, maybe if they're at work, but if they're just fiddling around, that's just extraordinary to me. So with that, I'm gonna run ahead and close this. It's a great book to read. I highly recommend you do. And Burke Hedges, 7 years after he had read The Greatest Salesman in the World, he had become successful. He had quit his job back then, and he became very successful in selling cell phones and had other businesses. And after 7 years, he had written a book. He went back to the place that he used to work, which was building boats. He went to this boatyard, and there was Bob, one of his best friends. They would chum together and they worked together for a while. And so Burke Hedges goes in and he says, "Hey, Bob, how you doing?" And they kind of chatted this and that. And he said, "Listen, I've written a book." And Bob goes, "No kidding." He says, "Yeah, I've written a book. Let me go get you one. They're right out my car." And he said, "Don't get me a book, bring me a beer." The same as always. So 7 years had changed the life of Burke Hedges, and 7 years had not made any dent in the life of Bob, he would still say, don't get me a book, get me a beer. So we're going to challenge you today as a call to action. If you're not reading, or if you haven't made it a real habit, we just suggest that you do. We think it is one of the greatest gifts that we have ever had. We have seen our boys. What we love is, we're on a thread. Sometimes they'll put mom and dad on the thread of our boys. A lot of times they do. And they'll say, how about reading this book? And we'll read it together, or we'll be on audio together. And we'll go back and forth with what they're reading. A lot of times they'll text their dad, what are you reading this week, Dad? And it's become a part of our culture in our family as well. It has made a great change. We're so grateful that we made that decision. So that would be our call to action. You deserve to be rich in many ways, rich in joy, peace, and happiness, and rich in the business area as well. And I believe if we can set that example and help others, it will be a blessing in their life as well. So with that, thank you all for your time. And I'm going to turn this back, I think, to George and Adrian. We thank you.
Thank
Bye-bye
you.
now.
Awesome job, you guys. Thank you so much. I loved hearing about that. You guys inspired us with getting your kids to read books with you. Oh my gosh. I only could dream of that. So I'm excited. You guys have really inspired us today. Thank you guys for your leadership. And yes, we're going to have a beautiful Friday. Leaders are readers. Make sure you grab even just one suggested book that they made can change the game in your business. I truly believe it. So pick the one that stood out to you the most. They did a great job of sharing which ones might be best. So pick one and let's get going. All right, friends. Okay, have a wonderful weekend and we'll see you tomorrow for onboarding. Bye, everybody.
Very
Bye-bye.
good.
Bye,
Thank you.
everyone. Thank
Bye.
you. Thanks, George and Adrian. Thank you, everyone.